Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with a Thursday night football preview between the Vikings and the Eagles. We got ourselves two high-powered offenses going at it, which means we're going to have a lot of scoring and quite a few different ways we can attack the slate. The chalk way is going to be to take some wide receivers, probably Kirk Cousins and Jalen Hurts together. But here in this video, we're going to break down maybe a few more creative ways to attack the slate, especially from a lower-owned GPP perspective. By the end, you'll have all the knowledge you need to go out there, get your lineup building process started to hopefully go out there and have yourself a profitable showdown slate. So a lot of info to get into here. Let's go ahead and get this thing started. We've got a moderately high total in this game at right around 48.5 points. Depends on which book you're looking at. Some of them have the total at 49 points, but in either circumstance, quite a few points implied being to be scored here. You've got the Eagles as sizable favorites, 6.5, 7-point favorites, depending on that book once again. And I tend to agree with that sort of line. The Eagles here have the more balanced team. They have a plus defense and offense out there, whereas the Vikings probably more of a middle of the road defense, plus offense for sure, but kind of growing into what they're going to be. The Eagles, of course, made it to the Super Bowl last year, so I don't think we need to have any super big hot takes out here, right? The Vikings could certainly pull the upset off out there on the road, but it's not like we'd expect that to happen more than often than not. Few things to note with that spread. A lot of people are going to stack the Eagles side. You're going to see a few people run 3-3 stacks. I'd see a 4-2 Viking stack, a 4-2 Eagle stack are going to be extremely prominent. I don't think you're going to see a lot of 5-1s, whether it's a 5-1 for the Vikings. I think that'll be extremely rare, and I don't think many people are going to be running 5-1 Eagle stacks. And while those are fringe outcomes, usually don't hit quite as often, right, as your 3-3s and your 4-2s. You're going to get a lot of it leveraged to them. There's going to be a lot of low-owned plays, right, that you can get to in those 5-1 kind of stacks. And it's not necessarily who you're using in those lineups, it's how you're playing them, right? A lot of people are going to use the fringe options for either team, but usually not in the kind of build where you're going to have 4 or 5 players from the same team. So I talked about the chalk before. The chalk is going to be more of a balanced build, a 4-2 or a 3-3 in either direction. I would challenge you to go out there and build lineups that are a little bit more creative, right? The Cowboys game, Cowboys-Giants, you saw the Cowboys go out there winning a 5-1 stack. We saw a few other games there. I mean, Cleveland versus the Bengals game, right? That would be a 5-1 stack for the Browns out there. Heck, the Steelers versus the 49ers, right? You could have very easily argued for a 5-1 stack there, maybe a 4-2 at the very most. These game stacks, even in pretty competitive game scripts, hit a lot more often than you'd think. And really, I'd say even like a 4-2 stack for the Vikings is starting to get a little bit more different than those 3-3s and those 4-2 Eagle stacks. So if you're going to avoid anything for your large field GPPs, maybe avoid the 3-3 script, maybe you take those 4-2 Eagle stacks and completely throw them out the window, because I don't think they're that high in terms of hit rate that you have to play them. So we're going to start with the Eagles here. We're going to go player by player, talk about some of the implications, some of the ways that you can change it up when it comes to game script, but there are a lot of different ways that you could attack the slate other than what's going to be chalk. So first off with Jalen Hurts. A lot of people are going to start with Jalen Hurts at captain. He's 75% owned in total when it comes to the total ownership number there, and that is perfectly fine, right? Jalen Hurts, the best play on the slate. I would say that's not a hot take by any means, but it's how you use Jalen Hurts. A lot of people are going to use him in those 3-3 stacks or those 4-2 Eagle stacks. The fact of the matter is Jalen Hurts can get it done in pretty much any type of stack. Whether you're going with 4-2 for Vikings, right? Maybe you use Jalen Hurts as your captain there. I'm going to run it back with 4 Vikings, just one other player on the Eagles. Or maybe even at a 1-5 stack, you could use Jalen Hurts at captain and 5 other Vikings. And hear me out on it, right? Typically with a quarterback, we need players to go along with him, but not really when it's somebody like Hurts that brings this much rushing upside to the table. There were games last year where Hurts ran for 3 touchdowns, went for 100 rushing yards and a few touchdowns out there, and in a relatively low scoring affair, might be the only player from the Eagles that you absolutely have to have. A few other things that contribute to that. You have a murky running back situation, right? Last year, they were using a running back by committee. This year, it's looking like the same thing. And now that somebody like Kenneth Gainwell is questionable to play, really shading towards out at this point, it's going to just even more so, muck those waters up a little bit, right? Make it a little bit harder to decide who's going to get the bulk of those carries, the majority of them for the Eagles. which means that somebody like Jalen Hurts, you might post 25, 30 fantasy points. The next highest scorer on the team might be 7, 8 fantasy points, right? Because the running backs might be all cannibalizing each other. And then from the wide receiver perspective, I mean, you have some elite tier options in a Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown here, but they're expensive, right? They're $10,600, they're $9,000 a piece. So let's say that this game, right, is a little bit lower scoring than we expect. The optimal lineup could be Jalen Hurts, maybe plus one player on the Eagles, and then 4 players from the Vikings, just based on how all the snaps, all the usage for the Vikings is a little bit easier to predict. So we'll get to the Viking side here in a few minutes. But, outside of, I'd say, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, the usage for the Philadelphia side is not nearly as clear-cut as what we have there for the Vikings. So I mentioned Gainwell potentially being out. I have him projected out as of right now. That means that players like a DeAndre Swift, Boston Scott are going to get majority of the snaps. You're also likely to see Rashad Penny active for this game. He was a healthy scratch for week 1. If he's going to play at $1,600, then he's a player that potentially can score a touchdown, and I think is going to be extremely low owned. So you could pretty much play any running back on the Eagles, and I think it'd be okay. Even if you're taking a Jalen Hurts at captain, right? There's enough implied points in this game. There's enough rushing usage to go around on the Eagles to sustain multiple rushers and multiple rushing touchdowns, as you saw there last year. At tight end, you've got Goddard, right? He's an extremely consistent piece. In terms of points per dollar, I think he's definitely a value when it comes to the salary. Eagles defense, anytime you're playing Kirk Cousins, who's a little bit mistake prone, might be worth a few looks there. Kickers for both teams, really just average plays, I would say. Not much of a hot take there. And if you're going to go really cheap for the Eagles, you do have Jack Stoll there. You also have Grant Calcaterra, who are both the backup tight ends for the Eagles. If you're looking for that 1-2 yard touchdown, right, 6-7 fantasy points to get to the optimal, then maybe they're players that you could consider. It's worth noting that a $200 player like that only has like a 7-8 point ceiling is usually only optimal in very low scoring scripts, right? So we don't want to go crazy with these sort of players in those builds. Before we hop into the Viking side of things, just want to remind you, if you're looking for access for all of my projections, everything that I'm posting on a weekly basis, both for Showdown and the main slates, check out my Patreon page. There's a link down below in the description of the video. On there, you can download all of the spreadsheets that you see in my videos for all of your optimizers, all of your research process to go out there, make it a little bit simpler, save you a little bit of time. We've got all the stats on here, all projected ownership numbers, projected points numbers for use in your lineups to go out there and make yourself a little bit more profitable on that side. On top of that, you get to see my exposure both for player pool at captain and the flex positions for the entire pool, and you get a lot of explanations involved as well, right? We talk about the different game scripts that I'll be utilizing players in, the different roles that I'm setting in my optimizer to make sure that I'm building lineups the way that I want to, because I play 150 different lineups, right? I'm not going to hand build all 150 of those, so to make my process easier, I use an optimizer, and I'll give you guys those sort of roles to use for your lineups. So you've been wondering, right, all the behind the scenes info that you see a lot of the people in the Patreon talking about, that's how you get access to it. So link is down below. We've got a Discord server on there too that you can interact with the rest of the community on. It's an absolute blast, and we'd love to have you as a part of the community. But with the shameless plug aside, let's hop over to the Viking side here, which I think from the game theory angle is the way to attack this slate. And it's not that I think the Vikings are for sure going to win here. I think that they're live to, right, as any of these elite tier offenses are going to be. It's that their offense is a lot more predictable. In 2021, 2022, the Vikings were one of the best offenses for main slate stacks because we called them an offensive funnel. Right, you had the quarterback, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and then that was about it for the Vikings offense. You could throw Dalvin Cook in there if you wanted to add some rushing upside, but through the air, the Vikings had a clear identity, right? 2 alpha male wide receivers and a team that was usually in competitive shootout type of game scripts. Well, fast forward to this year, they've added TJ Hawkinson to the mix. They have had Adam Thielen leave the team, so with the addition of a Jordan Addison, maybe they're a little bit deeper than what they were there in 2021, 2022, but still a team, at least as of week 1, right? If that Tampa Bay versus the Minnesota game was evidence of anything, they're going to be in these close competitive games for probably most of the season. And for guys that are looking for through the air stacks, right, offensive stacks, it makes Kirk Cousins a really attractive option, especially when he's only $9,200. So though Justin Jefferson at a whole $12,400 might cost you an arm and a leg, might be a little bit expensive there, some of the other stacks for Minnesota are really cheap and really easy to get to. So you could start with the Cousins, for example, make your second man in a TJ Hawkinson, who has a fantastic matchup against this Philadelphia team. They no longer have CJ Gardner-Johnson to worry about. They don't have the best slot corners on the team. And if they try to use a linebacker to cover TJ Hawkinson, well, good luck with that there too. So I expect him to go out there and eat. He's one of my highest exposed players that we'll be getting to this week. And I think the 35% ownership number on him at flex is borderline disrespectful. And I think even 7% at captain is something that I'm going to have to get over the field on. But let's say you started with the Cousins, you took Hawkinson as your second man in. Heck, you can make Jordan Addison your third man in. You could still very easily take Jalen Hurts, maybe even mix in a Devonta Smith or an AJ Brown, and take one super cheap option to make that lineup work. If you were to go up here and start, let's say, Cousins and then Justin Jefferson, and you still wanted a mid-tier option over there on the Vikings, well, it makes that kind of buyback on the Eagles much harder to accomplish. So not only is the pricing softer for the Vikings, especially if you were to avoid, right, a Justin Jefferson up here, it lets you be extremely flexible with some of your buyback options. So in general, I think if you were to start a lineup with, let's say, like a Hawkinson at captain, I'm really liking those kind of builds, right? Especially because at captain, right, you'd only be spending about $10,000. You could very easily take 2 or 3 of these stud tier players around out a lineup that you feel really good about. For your last spot, I'll say, right, if you're taking a lineup that's going to be a little bit more chalky, I'd say, like, if you're taking Hawkinson at captain, right, almost everyone, right, is going to play a Hurts. Almost everyone's going to mix in a Kirk Cousins. One of those last 2 or 3 spots, you're going to have to get a little bit different with, right? Whether it's leaving salary on the table, whether it's potentially taking one of the value tier options down toward the bottom, that's going to be a little bit lower owned. Going to have to get a little bit funky with that lineup because just using Hawkinson at captain isn't going to be different enough, right? Because you're going to be funneled into a lot of the same players up top. You're going to have to make some sort of a stand down here in the mid to lower tier range. In terms of like value options on the Vikings, so you got KJ Osborne, he'll get plenty of playing time. I think he's a decent option. You got the kicker, Greg Joseph too, right? Just like a Jake Elliott, I think he's an okay play. You have Ty Chandler, who did get some snaps there in week 1, so I think that he'll have at least some sort of a workload. Unfortunately, it's not going to be that significant, so he's going to have to break off some sort of a splash play to get there in large field GPPs, but we have seen crazier things happen. Josh Oliver, your backup tight end. We've seen crazier things happen than backup tight end scoring. And I guess Joey Munt would be your third string tight end for the Vikings. You're probably going to have to ask a whole lot to happen, right, for him to be optimal. It's probably that 1-yard touchdown for somebody like a Johnny Munt. So there's not a bunch of these super cheap, punt options that I like this week. I think if you had to pick one, maybe Zacchaeus over there for the Eagles isn't the worst option. I mean, even Josh Oliver, right, backup tight end, would probably be 2 of my favorite options. What I like doing a little bit more out there is differentiating with one of these Eagles running backs. So I know before I kind of skipped over the running back situation there a little bit. A lot of people are going to play Swift. He's getting talked up by the coaching staff quite a bit this week. But whether it's a Boston Scott or a Rashad Penny, one of these two is going to score a 1-yard rushing touchdown, right? They're the bigger backs. I would bet that it's probably a Boston Scott that scores that touchdown. So whether it's a Boston Scott down here, whether it's Ty Chandler, right? Maybe he gets the 1-yard touchdown out there for the Vikings side. They sub him in for Alexander Mattison. I have to say Madison's a pretty good goal line back, so he'll score quite a few touchdowns out there. But we're talking about large field GPPs, right? We need things to really go our way. There are tons of these mid-tier options you can get to. I mean, Quez Watkins, right? He catches that 50-yard touchdown that he does, seemingly 4 or 5 times every single year. He gets into the optimal lineup. So up top, a lot of really straightforward plays. I'd say everyone from TJ Hawkinson up. Actually, let's go from Dallas Goedert up. Everyone except for Kenneth Gainwell is going to be in my player pool. We're going to have everyone up there in the pool. That should be pretty much the case for everyone out there, especially if you're playing 150 lineups. It's what you're doing from Dallas Goedert and down that is going to win or lose you to slate, right? Trying to avoid some of the chalkier plays, right? Trying to get a little bit different, leaving salary on the table. I guess to talk over some of the chalk, right? DeAndre Swift, I think that ownership number is just going to continue to rise throughout the week. A few other chalky plays, the kickers, right, are always right around 20% owned. So believe it or not, that's why I think that they're actually not the best plays. There's some of the higher owned options down low here. I'd rather take a shot on one of these skill position players, right? 12% on a Watkins. You've got 5% ownership, right, on a Boston Scott and a Rashad Penny. It feels like one of those players. And it could be a Grant Calcaterra. It might end up being like a Jack Stoll down here, right? One of these 1-yard touchdown sort of players. One of these guys is going to be on the optimal. I can almost guarantee you it's going to be one of these skill position players down here that scores some sort of a touchdown, has some kind of a splash play. I would much rather take these guys over these kickers in these defenses. It's just, it feels like that kind of slate, especially because the usage is so spread around on the Eagles, that you're going to see something like that happen. I'd say like Ty Chandler, Josh Oliver, probably a little bit less likely, right, to get that splash play. But it's, yeah, especially those Eagles options, I think you have a lot that you can work with there. So just to finalize this, give you guys some closing thoughts for the slate, right? The chalk is going to be to play somebody like a Hurts, at least one of these Eagles wide receivers, then buy it back with one of the elite tier options on the Vikings. I would say to try and get a little bit different about it, right? Maybe you play Hurts by himself, right? Maybe you start with one of the Vikings players at the captain spot. I just think that the Eagles offense is a little bit too much rush heavy for my liking. So if you're going to take anyone from the Eagles, maybe it's just 2 or 3 of them in a lineup at the very most. So I'm going to be a little bit heavier on the Vikings than most people out there. And it's all about the game theory edge, right? Trying to get different, give us a little bit of differentiation, and hopefully some leverage in GPPs too. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button for me. And also, go ahead and comment down below your top play on the slate. It doesn't have to be your top projected play. It can be that sneaky option that you're getting to that others aren't. Who's going to win you the large field GPP this weekend? Go ahead, give me your bold hot takes out there. I would love to hear that down in the comments. Helps us out with the algorithm, helps get the video out there to even more people, and just helps add to the conversation, right? We love ourselves some hot takes out there, and I'm looking forward to see what you guys have for me. But until next time, best of luck with all of your lineups out there, whether you're playing in large field GPPs, cash, single entry, you guys know the deal. Over there on my Patreon, not only do we have our DFS projections, but also a few different props that I've taken as well. We have the Hawkinson over 4.5 receptions. That thing got bumped within like 30 minutes. We have the over on Devonta Smith receptions too on Underdog. It's fixing to be a pretty solid slate. So if you're looking for all of my exposure on that side, make sure to check out the Patreon page. But until then, best of luck with those lineups, those prop bets, and I'll see you guys for the next slate there for this weekend.